All right. Hello, everyone. This is Pen to Paper. I'm Leah Lindeman. And here today, I'm extremely excited to bring on a special guest, Dr. Philip Oldfield. But he's also known to many as Philly Raccoon. And we're going to get into that in a little bit, but we'll let him explain that to us. So, your book is called The Chronicles of Philly Raccoon, The New Normal. And that's a term that none of us have really heard before 2020. We'll kind of get into that a little bit as well. But we're here to discuss what inspired him to write the book, the themes in his book, and so much more. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? We know that you're a doctor, you have some degree. Tell us more about that.
Okay. I started off, I was born and I was ill. When I was born, I was really ill. And then 19 years later, I was working at the same hospital to pay off the debt. At which case I realized I enjoyed science, eventually got a DPhil, which is the same as a PhD in clinical biochemistry. And then I was working for the pharmaceutical industry for the past 30 years. I think in the final 10 years, I was an independent consultant, giving advice on how to get drugs out on the market and helping them do it. Yeah.
All right. Well, you definitely have a lot of experience with drugs and pharmaceutical companies, which we'll definitely touch on later. Tell us about your book, Chronicles of Philly Raccoon, The New Normal, and what inspired you to write it.
Okay, well, it goes back before COVID, actually. When I was working for a pharmaceutical company, and we were walking along the village to the pub to have some food, and I was noticing these old men just sitting on the roadside, just watching life go by, and I was thinking to myself, what a waste of time. And then I found myself in Canada 20 years on doing the same thing at a yacht club. And I saw a group of young people looking at me the same way I looked at them and realized what a hypocrite I was. And then realized that life was going at such a fast rate that we can't absorb it all. And sometimes we need a time where we can have a time of reflection. I realized during the pandemic, I don't have a smartphone, by the way. I realized a lot of people had smartphones and they were glued to them and glued to the computers and glued to the television, and realized that they were losing touch with humanity, in a sense, that they were so involved in the technical side and technology that they forgot about the human aspects of being with people and talking to people, etc., which only got worse during the pandemic when the lockdowns occurred.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote the book to it's a book about critical thinking, and we are bombarded from so many directions at once nowadays, on the phone, on the television, on the telephone, you name it, and that we're too busy to think. As a result, we can take in information that if we were to think about it and ask questions, we'd think, well, what's going on? And in a sense, we are losing our humanity because we're losing touch with getting to know other people, getting to know how they feel, etc. The reason for writing the book was quite funny. I actually got the picture in the book. I was so fed up of hearing COVID, this, that, and the other on the television, radio, everything. My wife would have it on the radio, etc. And it was COVID this, COVID that. Everyone was getting into a panic. And I was thinking, I just want to get out of this. So I decided I looked on Facebook, and there was an artist by the name of Eve Charbonneau, and she did some really good drawings, well, not drawings, paintings with acrylics, and a lot of some of them were of raccoons, which attracted my attention. So she even did a painting while holding a raccoon. So that is multitasking. And so I thought, well, if she can do it, I can have a go at doing painting. So I've never done painting before, apart from walls and ceilings. And so my wife is an artist as well, and she had some canvas. So she provided the canvas. My son provided the acrylic paints, and I got the brushes from the dollar store. And I proceeded to do my first and last painting. After dropping the brushes on many occasions and falling on the floor once, because I do have a neurological condition where coordination is quite difficult. My wife turned around to me and said, I think it would be safer if you write another book. And that was the book. And it included the painting as well. So, and it's a book to make people think. And what I saw during that time, it takes it takes a few subjects that are very emotional. And I've noticed that people would disagree over something that's very emotional. And all of a sudden they become, from friends, they become enemies. And a real hatred between them. And I realized at that point that somehow we're losing touch with people's feelings, etc. And why can't we disagree over things and talk about them? But instead of talking about them, it was insults upon insults and people being defriended, etc. And this happened all too often. And in the extreme case, when you see the news, it ended up in violence.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I sort of thought about Ian McGilchrist's book. He wrote a book about the divided brain. He's a neurologist. And he was saying, Einstein said that the analytical mind is the faithful servant, but the intuitive mind is a precious gift. In this world, we have honored the servant, but have forgotten the gift. And what he was referring to is that we were using our left side of the brain more than our right side. And so the left side of the brain is more analytical. It's actually analytical. It's actually manipulative as well. And the only emotion that can come from it is hatred and anger from that side, whereas the intuitive part is the more artistic side, etc. So I would think anyone who writes books, has a lot of imagination, would use the right side a lot more. And being a scientist, I was analytical by training, but I would consider myself as creative by nature. So
well, we can definitely see that in your book, The New Normal. It's not just nonfiction, it's creative nonfiction. You've developed all these little stories with the raccoons and kind of melded that with reality. So you did very well.
So I think I'm really concerned about the way that our society is going, because why can't people discuss issues instead of fighting about them? And people seem to, it's like two armies fighting, but it's within the same country. And as I said, it's really sad, but there is a solution. And I would like to go into that a bit later on.
For sure. I have a question because you mentioned that we've lost touch with people's feelings. But interestingly enough, that's what people are talking a lot about these days, how people need to share their feelings more. We need to be more proactive on mental health awareness and all those things. So why is it that there's this disconnect between people know that they need to be more in touch with their feelings, sharing their feelings, and then just having lack of empathy for people in general?
Okay. I think I think Ian McGilchrist will be able to answer this better than me. But having said that, the one thing that the left side of the brain tends to be very focused on a particular problem. As a result of that, you would lose the bigger picture. Now, although you think you've got the bigger picture, let me take climate change for an example. Okay, whether you believe it's happening or not, because some people who believe it's happening, some people don't believe it's not. But we are saying something needs to be done, something needs to be done. And some things are being done, but it's too narrow. It won't have any effect. And it's like we're saying something needs to be done, and we're heading towards disaster. And it's like that with our feelings and with the way we're getting on with people. Is we can see the problem, but we don't have the ability to then go forward, to then find out a solution that actually works.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. It's very clear. I do have a question here in the comments, so let me pull it up. So there's mounting evidence that COVID was no more deadly than a bad flu season. What's your opinion? Unless this is something you want to jump into a little later.
No, I can jump into it now. I think certainly in the earlier variants in China, that actually in Wuhan itself, there was a lot of people who died. If you think about Canada with the Alpha variant was a lot worse than the Beta variant. That was a lot worse than the Omicron. Omicron is like a cold, basically. Now with the Alpha variant, that mostly hit the old people's homes. And it was hitting if you look at the people who were affected, it was mostly people who were 70 and above, were about 80% of the people who died. And the others would have had comorbidities. And so I would like to be cautious. And well, I wouldn't call it a flu anyway. It's a COVID. It's a COVID-2 virus, but it's certainly not as deadly as it was made out to be in the beginning. There was a lot of scaremongering, and that was what prompted me to write the book, because I wanted to get away from all of that.
And the book is definitely diverting in many ways that, as a reader during that time, you could get away from the craziness a little bit and just enjoy the creative nonfiction you wrote.
Yeah, and as I said, it's. I think. Well, I mean, I don't want to go into lockdowns or anything else, but the lockdown certainly harmed me in the sense that I would have liked to have gone out and seen people. It's very difficult to do that. As it turns out, people who were of working age, say 50 and under, were affected very little by COVID-19.
And this is the Alpha variant that you're talking about.
And so they could have stayed out and partied and everything, and we would have had herd immunity by now. It was mainly the older people who were affected. Now, younger people are affected now for a different reason, but I don't want to really go into it because it's a bit complicated.
Okay. Well, are we going to be touching on some of that when we go into the slides?
We could do, yes.
Okay. So why don't we go into the slides now? I have them ready and set up. So let me just make sure that we have that going here. All right. We got that. You're going to share that. Although I'm going to see if we can. There you go. We've got the two of us, and we have your slides together. Perfect.
Now that is slide 1.
Yes.
Are you sure?
Well, let me see. Let me double check.
That's slide 1.
That's slide 1. All right. There we go.
Okay. So if you look at slide 1 and then take a little look at it and go to slide 2.
All right.
Which one is the easiest to absorb?
Well, I would say the second one.
Yeah. And I would say most people would, because the right side of the brain, which controls the left eye, by the way, would focus on pictures, whereas the right eye and the left side of the brain focuses on words and numbers. And so if you're ever doing a PowerPoint presentation, always have your pictures on the left-hand side.
Very good to note.
So the next slide, I'll put a couple of slides up with some quotations that are very useful.
All right, there we go.
Okay, well, here's a quotation by a Republican politician. I'll read it out. I think it's important. Opinion is really the lowest form of human knowledge. It requires no accountability and no understanding. The highest form of knowledge is empathy, for it requires us to suspend our egos and live in another person's shoes. Now, I've based that quotation upon one by Bill Bullard, who's who was a Republican politician. If you go to the next one. Okay. Assumptions are the most dangerous form of knowledge. Assumptions are caught and bought without an open, conscious dialogue to establish what is and what is not true. Now, what we have, before you show the next slides, but what we have in the next 5 slides, there have been assumptions that have been made, but those assumptions have not been detailed. And so if you just catch the comments themselves and believe them without seriously thinking about whether or not it's true, that is very dangerous. Now, I'd like to say to people that the next 5 slides would deal with how this is. The next 5 slides are 5 slides, and as an example of how a country can manipulate a whole, well, how the media can manipulate a whole country towards hating a minority group. Now, the country I've chosen, surprise, surprise, was Canada. So some of you might be offended by the next 5 slides, but please don't tune out because it will all make sense in the end.
Okay.
We'll go to the next slide. Okay. So here we have a slide which says, what's wrong with the vaccine hesitant? The assumption that's made is that there is something wrong with the vaccine hesitant. Being classified in that way, you know, is that statement true? Well, if you make a choice and you decide not to take the vaccine, then you have to have some proof as to whether something's wrong with you. But it says what's wrong with vaccine hesitant question mark. And then there's a load of statements which were made on radio broadcasts. And Black Canadians get sidelined, they're Black Canadians are more likely to be hesitant. Vaccine hesitancy make for awkward talks. But why do they make awkward talks? It's not because of the vaccine hesitant. It's because of when the subject is brought out, it's very often the people who are not vaccinated who are shot down. What makes me laugh is the University of Calgary actually came out with a hesitancy guide giving doctors facts for struggling patients. Now, you've got to transition from vaccine hesitant. Now you're a patient. Patients are sick. So are they saying that people who are vaccine hesitant sick in some way? Then you've got psychologists. So, it explains vaccine hesitancy and how reluctant minds can be changed. And so it's all very well saying this, but because it's one-sided and the other side of the argument is not put forward, you have to consider this as propaganda. So if you go to the next slide.
Yep.
Okay. Now it gets up a notch. It says meet the unvaccinated. And the only part that I want you to focus on is the part that says, what could it take to convince the small but determined group of Canadians who remain wary of the COVID-19 vaccines on offer? Now, what would it take for most people is if they could be assured that they were safe and effective. There was nothing mentioned here that people were concerned about the safety and of these vaccines because of the huge number of deaths that were occurring in the States. And so it's very one-sided. It doesn't really give what the concerns are of people who are unvaccinated. And so really, we have to consider this again as propaganda. But I underlined what could it take to convince the small but determined group. We're going to find out what the government did do, and then find out, do you think that was right? Okay, we go to the next slide. Oh yeah, it's also this is an amusing one. It's this appeared in the American Journal of Medicine. It's a very respectable journal. It was a group of scientists from Toronto, from Sunnybrook Research Institute. COVID vaccine hesitancy and risk of a traffic crash. They concluded that if you were that the COVID vaccine hesitant people had a 75% increase chance of having a road traffic crash. And then it says an awareness of these risks might help to encourage more COVID vaccination. It also said in the conclusion, these results suggest that unvaccinated people should be cautious indoors with other people and outdoors in traffic. Now, looking at this, I was looking at this and thinking, well, before COVID, everyone must have been getting into a lot of crashes. because the vaccine wasn't around to prevent them at the time. But what did the mainstream media think of this paper? So we go to the next slide.
Yeah.
Okay. So here we're looking at CTV News and Global News, and they reported the paper, and they went one step further to say that people who were unvaccinated were more likely to flout the law and to be more reckless. Both statements are totally unsubstantiated. And so you've got to bear in mind, and I'll say at this point that CTV News, Global News, and CBC are part of what's known as the Trusted News Initiative, which was formed by the BBC to stop the spread of misinformation. Now, my question is, would you trust an article such as these? If we go to the next slide. And this is the fifth slide. I'm going to spend a bit more time on this.
Okay.
There was a study, a Canadian study, and I'll read it out. It says, a Canadian study that vastly underestimated the protection of COVID-19 vaccines provided against Omicron variant has been revised, but not before it spread widely on social media by anti-vaxxers. So now, vaccine hesitant, unvaccinated, now we're anti-vaxxers. Academics, well, I suppose that would have to include me, and the Russians. So now anti-vaxxers are associated with the Russians, who are unpopular anyway because of what's going on in the Ukraine. You can see what's going on. So they're in these 5 slides that I've just shown you, it's developing a split between unvaccinated and vaccinated people. So it's actually producing a split. It's not actually resolving a problem. It says the findings were updated on January the 28th with additional data that showed very different results. Here are the different results. The researchers found the effectiveness to be only 36%. That's 1% lower than the original. And against the Omicron variant. And the thing is, 59 days after 2 doses, there was, that was up 59 days after 2 doses, there was 36% effectiveness with no protection after 6 months. That is not a vaccine. That would not protect you. And it's obvious that, if you have to take something that often, you would want to go back to the drawing board and say, what's wrong? Mm-hmm. But here's what I want you to look at. And this is the dangerous, misleading part. It says, after 2 doses with no protection after 6 months, which increased to 61% a week after a booster. A week is really nothing. What about a month or 6 months? It's not mentioned. And so really, when it's saying that, you immediately take a look at the 61%, you forget about what the clarification is, and you could be misled. Now, these, this and other media that has been posted, which included videos and directives from Health Canada, from the government of Canada. How did the media affect the population of Canada? Let's go to the next slide.
Sure. Before we do, I actually have 2 questions.
Okay.
So let's tackle them and then we'll get on. Okay. So first question is, what's your take on vaccine injuries? Unless you're covering this later.
Okay. Yes, they exist. And I think in Canada they're being misdiagnosed and underreported. I think in a sense, I've never really trusted the Canadian figures. I've always gone to the VAERS database, which, although it actually admits that it's underreported, does give actual cases and what's happened. The numbers that you get from Health Canada, in order to try and get something that is useful, is like pulling teeth. And so yes, the vaccine injuries do occur, and I would like to say at this point that if Canada had adopted using ivermectin instead of the vaccines for treating COVID-19, we would have saved a lot more lives, and there would be no vaccine injuries, no vaccine deaths. I think that's something that I'd be accused of misinformation. But the fact that the Health Canada does not want to even discuss these issues, when I ask them to come forward and we can discuss them, I feel justified in saying that.
Okay, so that's it. Their hesitancy to even discuss the issue or the possibility is definitely a good indicator that there's something awry. The next question we have, it's a long one. So every province has admitted they were putting a COVID death on a death certificate, even though they died of something else. How can we believe any statistic the media or government has released?
I think I already answered that. You don't.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you're mixing in truth with lies, then it all gets muddled, and we really can't clean that muddle out and actually find the truth.
I think in a sense, Health Canada might do a bit of backtracking on the number of COVID deaths, because I did a comparison between, and of course it was per capita. I did a comparison between Canada and Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe was using ivermectin and got the number of deaths by COVID down to 0.
Okay.
And
so this is where you get your idea that there would have been no vaccine deaths from Zimbabwe's.
Well, Zimbabwe was still using. They're still using a vaccine, but it's the Chinese one, which is more of a traditional vaccine.
Okay, how so?
Well, it's like any other vaccine. It's a killed version of the actual virus itself.
Okay.
And so it's not a genetic vaccine, or a vaccine that's using gene therapy technology, as I would term it.
Okay, interesting. We do have a comment here about the VAERS database. The VAERS database only shows 1% of the diseases or deaths. So multiply this by 100 times and you have the right amount.
Yeah.
Would you concur with that?
It says that on it. It actually says that on the website.
Okay. I didn't know that. I believe I've actually looked up the website before.
I mean, rather than going by absolute numbers, I think if you take a look at the graph of the number of deaths, it's flatlining more or less. And then as soon as the mRNA vaccines come out, you're talking about thousands. It's that straightforward. I mean, if it was an aeroplane that had crashed, they would ground all of those aircraft until the problem was solved.
Mm-hmm.
But with the vaccines, they just carried on giving them out, and they're still giving them out.
Yeah.
But I was talking about empathy.
Yes. We have gotten a little sidetracked, but I guess, there's a lot of people here that are interested in these things here. Okay, so you want to head to the next slide?
I think so, because this.
Let's go.
No, this would. If you go to the next slide.
Here we go.
Okay, now this is one important slide I'd like to go to.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Toronto Star, which is very much pro liberal. It says shimmering divide over who isn't vaccinated. So here it admits that there is a divide, but the divide has obviously been caused by the media in the first place. Now, if you read what it says, I'll read some of the Twitter statements that they quoted. If an unvaccinated person catches it from someone who is vaccinated, boo-hoo, too bad. I have no empathy left for the willfully unvaccinated, let them die. Funnily, they use the word empathy.
Yeah.
I honestly don't care if they die from COVID, not a little bit. Unvaccinated patients do not deserve ICU beds. At this point, who cares? Stick the unvaccinated in a tent outside and tend to them when the staff have time. Now, actually, that should be counted as hate speech. But when you actually read the article itself, it's not. There's nothing mentioned about hate speech. And I would like to mention at this stage that the lack of empathy goes both ways.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side, it says no jab could mean no jobs for Air Canada employees. Actually, after that was published, Air Canada had a policy of no vaccination, you're suspended from work without pay, which means you don't get EI. Either because you refuse to be vaccinated or whatever. But there was 5 British Airways pilots who died suddenly after being vaccinated from either heart attacks or blood clots. And a lot of the Canadian Air Canada employees were saying it serves them right for trying to keep their jobs. That is a lack of empathy and also showing hatred. So it goes both ways.
Yeah.
But what really upset me about this was that, back in the fall of 2019, it would have been inconceivable to believe that ordinary people in Canada would state in such a public manner rhetoric reminiscent of Nazi Germany during the late 30s to 1945. And if you don't believe me, just try this, substitute unvaccinated with Jewish or Jew, and you get this. I have no, sorry, I can't read it. Next slide.
Oh, next slide.
Yeah, I just couldn't read it. I mean, just to show that, there is such a lot of hatred out there.
Yeah.
And if you go to the next slide, it would have the title of the actual article itself. This was in the same issue. It says, when it comes to empathy for the unvaccinated, many of us aren't feeling it. So they're actually admitting that they have no empathy.
Mm-hmm.
But if you read what I circled in red, even with, I'm trying to read, even with burnt out health professionals struggling with emotions and a polarized debate, how do we bring, bring healing, as it were. Well, the thing is, notice what it said. There was no admission by these people that they were showing hatred. So the burnt out health professionals are saying, we're the burnt out health professionals, we're the victims. It's the unvaccinated who are to blame for us not feeling empathy. And this is where I was talking about left and right side of the brain. If you realize the problem, why can't you get to it?
Yeah.
Well, they know the problem, but they can't get to it. Now, the person who wrote the article, Nadine Youssef, she actually did a very worthwhile article saying that there should be a dialogue. But there was never a dialogue between unvaccinated and vaccinated people. I personally have called for a dialogue to talk about early treatment, the and the testing of the vaccines or the mistesting of them, and to talk about the vaccine injuries. No response. There has been no response at all. You know, people people are not listening to the unvaccinated, although everyone is saying we should have a debate, we should have a dialogue, but it doesn't happen. And this is one of the symptoms, if you like, of the way in which there is a lack of empathy. Even though you might admit it, you're never going to solve the problem. So the question is, okay, we've got all of this media that has divided vaccinated against unvaccinated, how a nation can be turned to discriminate against a population that is in the minority now. So where is this coming from? If we go to the next slide. Okay, here we have two articles, one by the CBC and the other one by True North. And both articles report the same event. And that is that President Macron from France had vowed to pressure France's vaccine holdouts. In fact, he was quoted in saying, the French Parliament suspends COVID-19 debate. That would have been a good thing. After Macron says he wants to, can I say piss off? Oh, sorry. He wants to piss off the unvaccinated. Now, if you hear what Justin Trudeau says, he just adds gasoline to the fire. I don't want to read it all out, but he's talking about Canadians are getting angry because of people who still refuse to get vaccinated. He talks about although most Canadians have stepped up to get their shots, the implication is that those who aren't vaccinated have let the country down. And says the unvaccinated are still a problem. Now, because Canada has had one of the highest rates of vaccine uptake, if the vaccine worked, they should have reached herd immunity very early on, and we would have no COVID-19. That did not happen. And so, because the pandemic was not halted, even though we had a high rate of vaccination uptake, that alone shows the vaccines didn't work. It's what's known as immunology 101. And this is, and the paragraph that really does upset me, because it's an outright lie. It says when people see that, you know, that beds are taken, that, you know, that there are, so I'll have to get a bit closer and watch to see this, that there are, oh, well, basically what he's saying is that there aren't any beds for people for surgery and cancer treatment, etc.
Yes, because they're filled with people who chose not to get vaccinated, and they're frustrated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we all pay our taxes. It doesn't actually say that the unvaccinated people had COVID. You have to sort of watch that, and also when it says people are getting angry, you know, people are being threatened, you know, because you know, people are unvaccinated might give them a disease or whatever. You know, they're saying it's because of the unvaccinated that people are at risk. It's not because they're unvaccinated. It's because of people who have got the disease. People who are unvaccinated are perfectly healthy. People who have COVID-19 are not. And people who are vaccinated are just as much likely to get COVID-19 as people who aren't.
Very true.
And so that statement where it talks about people getting angry and threatened because of the threats, you know, of the unvaccinated, it's not. Now, with the True North article, actually quotes Justin Trudeau calling the unvaccinated extremist, misogynistic, and racist, which he did, although he did it in French, and in fact basically said that he's lashing out and blames the unvaccinated for his own failures, and that is actually true when you actually read the True North article and watch the video. Now, I will say at this point that with Bill C-18, news providers like True North and Rebel News, etc., will be more or less unavailable to Canadians. And so if you just got CBC News, Global News, and CTV.
Sorry, Phil, can I just interject here? And could you just explain what C-18 is for those who may not know what it is?
Oh, C-18, okay. Okay, it's a bill that's come out that would effectively censor Canadian news from the internet. You might have seen some television adverts where it says you can get an app for your reliable news stations, and it'll mention CBC and CTV. So about not mentioning that, but so we are at a crossroads, I think, when it comes to information, and who determines what is misinformation anyway? I think it's good to have more than one perspective, and then people can then discuss whether or not something is true or not.
Exactly.
Now, the next slide would be my Deal Canada, actually. This is Justin Trudeau speaking. Have you got the actual video?
I do. I've got it right here.
Justin Trudeau speaking in 2017. And I want to hear what, you know, want you to hear what he says. And it's something I entirely agree with.
All right. I'm going to play it.
The important thing to reflect on in that is ensuring that we're creating a society in which acts of hatred, acts of violent intolerance meant to strike fear into the hearts of a community are recognized as terrorism.
Okay, if you'd like to go to the next slide.
Yep. Let me just make sure the next slide we can see. I'm going to switch here. Okay, and I'm going to get back to our slides. All right, there we go.
Okay. Now we're back in 2023. Okay. And here we have a person who was fighting the Alberta Health Services because she was refused a transplant, even though she had natural immunity against the virus. Now, there is no medical reason why you should be vaccinated to be a recipient of a life-giving organ. Okay? So this was just purely put down there to, let's say, encourage or more accurately, to coerce people to get vaccinated. She spent ages going through a court case. Eventually, she launched a lawsuit against the Alberta Health Services for medical malpractice. Unfortunately, although she won the case, she actually died before she could have the transplant. So those that hate speech in that newspaper article is now manifesting itself into deaths. That person had died because they were not vaccinated. Could you count it as murder? Probably yes. If that person was had the transplant when she was due to have the transplant, perhaps she'd still be alive today. She's not an isolated case. If we go to another, the next slide.
The next slide, yeah.
This is particularly sad. I had to find out a bit more about him. He was denied a kidney transplant for being unvaccinated, and he died. And he was a father of 5, ran his own successful business. He had a heart for youth and ran a youth group. And took part in sports. He was an outstanding member of society. And he was only 34 years old when he died. That to me is particularly tragic. He's left a family of 5. And you know, I mean, there was no reason for him to be denied a kidney transplant. And that is really sad. And so the thing that we all, you know, in order to get empathy and healing, we need to have a dialogue. We need to, and I really do believe that a public inquiry is warranted, because people need to be held accountable for their actions. The truth needs to be known. And for the victims, not only the victims that we see here, but also those that have had vaccine injuries and those that have died because of the treatment instead of being given the correct treatment. And so if you'd like to go to the next slide.
Yeah.
I think we're nearly finished. Okay. Instead of, notice I put the picture on the left-hand side. I was good there.
Yeah.
Instead of there being a dialogue, all of this information is being censored. The scientists who have spoken up are being persecuted. The doctors who have administered life-saving drugs to cure COVID-19 are having their licenses taken away and being persecuted. The information is being censored. And so with Bill 18 coming up, well, with Bill 18, it's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better.
And can you share what Bill 18 is for those who don't know?
You asked me that question before.
Oh, okay, sorry. So before you said C18, I was wondering why there was no this time.
Sorry. Is this Bill C18? Sorry.
I was wondering, is this a brand new bill?
No,
just 18?
No, this is the censorship one.
Okay.
And where's it going to stop?
Yeah.
Now, it has been, now the dangers here is that whoever controls the media controls the culture. You've only got to ask anyone in an Eastern Bloc country, they'll answer that question for you. And it's happening here. And the question you need to ask is, what kind of culture are we heading into because of this? Now, censorship is a good thing when you're protecting a vulnerable section of society. But that is not what's been happening. Next slide. Okay, I've had to get some translation on this. The title of the book that is in Quebec schools now is called Pink, Blue, and You. And it's got here a book about gender stereotypes. And on the following couple of pages, it's got the first male army nurse. It's got the first homosexual couple that got married. And it's got the first person who's the first transgender person to become Senator of Delaware. So she was originally male. Then she decided that she wanted to be female, hence the picture. The top picture is the first female astronaut. And then I had to read up on this one, and it was talking about someone who was bispiritual. And by that, I mean someone who has got both a male and female spirit in them, and basically bisexual, to put it another way. And Malala, who I'm a great fan of, by the way, and I actually quoted her in my book, who's advocating education for girls. Now, all of those facts are true, but you have to ask yourself, why produce a book for young children talking about gender stereotypes and sexuality when there are other things, and then that's been promoted. And if you read down below, there was something on Facebook that someone forwarded to me. Someone told me one of their co-workers, 5-year-old child in kindergarten, came home from school, South Shore French Public, with a book about today you can be a boy, tomorrow you can be a girl, and that's okay. And that's 5 years old. Now, no wonder parents are up in arms about these issues and what's being taught in schools. However, if a parent was to go up to their 5-year-old child and say, there's only 2 genders, male and female. There's no others. That parent can face 5 years in prison for for transition therapy. Okay? And yet, if a person can go up to a 5-year-old and say, it's okay to be homosexual, it's okay to be transgender, get away from being heterosexual, that's okay. The law doesn't cover the opposite way. It's only one way. In fact, I read the bill, which is called C4, not to be confused with the explosive. And it actually referred to the concept of 2 genders as being a myth in the actual article itself. And so children need to be protected, and they're not. That's all I'd like to say about this. I think, well, it's all I have to say about this. But to put a positive note on it, and again, I want to talk about empathy. We want to get rid of stigma. And you don't do that by books like these to young children. Because all those books are going to do is to indoctrinate them to making bad decisions later on in life. It's almost like you're nudging a child to go from heterosexual to homosexual, basically. And that's the danger with these sort of books. And at that sort of age, a child absorbs everything. When you do have to talk about these subjects, you have to make sure that the child or adult understands what's involved, etc. And so, what I would like to see in schools, although this might never happen, is in high school, I would like to see a class which talks about stigmatism. Not stigmatism, that's high thing. Stigmas. I think one of the first ones is mental health. There's a stigma to that. And when do people get mental health issues? When they're in high school. And so when they're in high school, one could talk about these various stigmas and to have some sort, look beyond the mental illness, look beyond the gender. I think it's very sad that people actually define themselves because of the gender. There's more to a person than gender. And all you see is gender. All you see is mental health issue. All you see is a person's color, for instance. You need to get beyond that and look at the real person and look at the real individuals. And I think that type of education where one can have a dialogue to discuss these issues in an unbiased manner would serve to be a more positive idea. The other thing, of course, is that parents have to be involved. Parents are responsible for their children. It's all right to teachers say, "Oh, I won't tell your parents," but the teacher can walk away. The parent down the line has to cope with it. And so I think when these issues come up, it's where parents have to talk with their children and possibly their teacher as well, and to look into these things. It's far complicated than just giving a book out saying, you know, today you can be a boy, tomorrow you can be a girl, and that's okay. I think that's absolutely disgusting. And my last slide, you'd be glad to know, before I go into a general conversation, this is a slide by Dr. Arnie Burkhardt before he died. It is human responsibility that if I have the education and the ability to see something alarming and a threat to all of humanity, there is no way out. Always question what the so-called experts tell you. Oh, include me in that as well, by the way. Solidarity demands that you step forward and come out when you see something going wrong. If I see a car heading for a child on the street, I have to do something. I just cannot turn my back and say bad luck. Now, Professor Arnie Burkhardt was a pathologist, and he was instrumental in proving that the spike protein from the vaccines caused a whole host of different organ damages on the post-mortem samples that he had. He died under mysterious circumstances. And, although I don't want to speculate, there are some people thinking that he was probably murdered. But he's a great person, a great pathologist, highly respected. And I think I will end it there.
Well, thank you so much for putting together all the slides, for informing us about all these, all the issue, all the time.
I wasn't really going to speak about everything I spoke on. I mean, a lot of the questions kind of hammered that, but I am sad to see how things are going, and I think I think that the parents ought to step up. Unfortunately, in Quebec, it's very difficult, if not, it's very difficult, if not almost impossible now to homeschool. So they're literally trying to get everyone to go through the state school system. And really, I see these books and the type of teaching, and I didn't actually show a photograph of one of the teachers dressed up. But I believe that if children get indoctrinated from that early age, they would then become prey to sexual predators. And that's my biggest concern.
Of course. And so you mentioned at the beginning, before you showed us the slides, you kind of have shown us very deeply the lack of empathy, the bus that's going to run over the kid, and we want to do something. And people are saying we need to do something. There's lack of empathy, so let's do something about it. But you said because of their lack of knowledge or intuitiveness, they're not doing the proper thing. So what is the solution to this issue? Because it's a major issue, and it's not just a lack of empathy on those fronts in society. It's a lack of empathy on almost every front of society. So how do we fix this?
Okay, well, you don't have to show that slide anymore. We can go
All
into
right.
the bigger pictures. So if you
There you go.
now I can actually turn around to you like this, so that I need some help with or something like that.
Oh, actually, before you answer my question, I have a question here. Why can't they homeschool? There are online programs that are free to follow.
Okay, well, in Quebec, they brought out a new ruling that they've given the parents so much administration and reports to actually write. And I also believe that you could only homeschool your own children, whereas a lot of families got together to homeschool as a group, which took the pressure off. And I think they've done away with that as well. So they're actually making it harder. It's not that you can't. It's just that it gets to the point where there's so much work, it then becomes counterproductive.
Exactly.
All
right. So my question, what is the solution to all this lack of empathy? How can we move forward in a way that brings both sides together, discussing in a way that's not going to, either side is not going to blow up at the other and label each other and just not listen to the other? What is the solution to all this?
Okay, well, I think we've got. I'm a great fan of Candace Owen. Actually, she did a podcast during the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, and she's obviously on the side of the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
But she made a statement. She said, "People suck."
They sure do.
Well, Leah, you suck. I suck. Everyone sucks.
Yes.
And so it starts with us. And so we have to look at ourselves first in the mirror. And for that, I would only refer to I'm just going to do a bit of a summary from the Philly Raccoon book, this one here.
Yes, well, that's the book that we're touching themes on, so let's hear it.
Yeah, so I'm going to just read a little bit as to what the raccoons think the solution is.
Oh, before we go into that,
yes,
why don't you enlighten everyone, why raccoons? Why are you called Philly Raccoon? Just so throw in a little personable trait about you.
Okay, well, besides the fact that I like food, and I also wear this T-shirt.
Yes, it's keep calm and eat chocolate, right?
Keep calm and eat chocolate.
That's right.
And Philly Raccoon would like to be president one day. It all happened years ago. My daughter was meant to do some childminding for a person and didn't turn up. So this person phoned me up and said, "You're doing this instead." She was most insistent. And so I decided to leave a good impression. So when she came along in the car, I was drinking a beer out of a bottle, and the two kids were totally scared of me. And I said, "We'd like to watch telly," and they were going, so I put them in front of the television. And then I looked out the window and said, "Hey, there's some raccoons." And they suddenly lit up, and we all rushed down. We took photographs of these raccoons, and they were going down our driveway. And one of the raccoons was a fairly young one, and it was staring at me. And I was looking at it back, and we were literally locked in. And there came a point where it was, okay, we got the message. Yeah, we're friends, and that was it. And then for ages afterwards, that same raccoon used to pop by just to take it, just as take a look or whatever. Never used to ask for food or anything, but just look and be curious. He's probably thinking, well, he's a strange one. And And then I started to read up about these things, and I thought, well, you know, they're rather mischievous, although that's a very bad term to use nowadays.
How so?
Well, you know, you get charged, you get 10 years for mischief.
Really?
So there'll be there'll be Philly Raccoon carted off by the police thinking, okay,
No, put me down.
you know, sort of things like that. You know, and they're very intelligent, and you know, they kind of, you know, my wife doesn't like them. She says they're destructive, and I feed them along with the skunks.
Well, she does gardening, right? So I guess in that sense,
and they recruit up themselves as well. And I think that's what got me. You know, it was that one moment really, and then Philly Raccoon, and it was nice to have the first book I wrote, which was about my neurological condition. You know, Philly Raccoon will ask all these questions to the doctors and have them stumped, you know, and which was really funny. It was kind of like the biography. It was kind of like an autobiography through the back door because no one else would want it otherwise. And so I just carried on after that, really, and then I always kind of have that as my kind of alter ego, and so, you know, if I've done anything wrong, it's always been Philly's fault.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're completely innocent and not to blame.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And so that's how it so it was because I actually was doing some baby child minding when I didn't want to, really, and that ended up like this, you know.
Well, who could say no to that? Who could blame you? All right. Well, I know I sidetracked, but yes, Philly Raccoon, you were saying we're talking about the solution to this lack of empathy, and you mentioned Philly Raccoon, and that's where I went off on that tangent.
Yeah, well, I kind of, I mean, before I say any more, I reading what Jennifer says. Our creator does not think we suck. We are beautiful. Don't worry, Jennifer. I'm going to go into that. I'll put down here. Our only hope for mankind. Our only hope for humankind. Now, the story is that the raccoons were commissioned by God to put mankind, you know, straight on the straight path. You see, so right from the beginning, and so I will read all of this out. By the way, I hope you don't mind.
No. We'd love to hear this creative nonfiction work.
Our only hope for humankind. Remember in the beginning where humans made a decision to take charge of their own lives instead of allowing God to take his rightful place. It was at that point where common sense started to die and everything else died with it. In order to allow common sense to come into our lives again, we need to be completely renewed. Fortunately for us, it is now possible to decide and allow God to work in our lives. The choices we make today determine our future for tomorrow, for good or bad, and we have to abide by it. So don't blame other people for your circumstances or demand to be bailed out if you make a bad choice. Remember the painting of Lord Philly Raccoon. The picture within the picture, the top right-hand corner, that is the Oldfield coat of arms shield dating back from medieval times. And the family motto, Incrus Vincam, which means in Old Latin, victory through the cross. The baby VIP in the safe house grew up, lived a perfect life, and died on the cross 33 years later. To see the coat of arms shield itself, here is another picture. Oh, better show the picture. Here's the picture.
Yes.
Okay. So how can this coat of arms shield reveal a secret message known only to the raccoons until now? The new normal is getting close. Therefore, the code can now be revealed for the first time. The gold background represents heaven, a place where God is, where there is no war, pain, or death, and everyone lives in peace for eternity. Because we made a decision to call the shots in our own lives, that choice has already determined our destiny. We forfeit being with God for eternity because we chose not to have God take his rightful place in our lives. And that alone is what the Bible calls sin. As I said above, it is now possible to make a choice and allow God to work in our lives. This is where Jesus Christ comes in. And for us, it is good news. Because Jesus lived a perfect life on earth, he was the only one able to take away our sin. The red stripe represents Jesus' blood on the cross. He paid the price to take away our sin. The silver crosses represent his crucifixion, with the other two people, one either side. The silver also represents purity. God forgives our sin as we accept him to be our Lord and Saviour, allowing him to work in our lives by his Holy Spirit, changing us from the inside out so we live good lives. That was about 40 years ago. About 40 years ago, I said a very simple prayer that changed my life for the better, and no regrets. Please, God, come into my life as my Lord and Saviour and make me into the kind of person you want me to be. And thank you for forgiving me. Now, it's not been easy. It's been really hard. And when silver gets refined, God tends to heat it up. And so we get heated up and some of the bad bits come to the surface, and then we deal with them together, both God and myself.
Mm.
And it's a process. But in order to be fair, I have to say this. Every choice we make has consequences. Sin equates with death. We are not only considering natural death, which happens to us all, but of spiritual death. That is, a life without God and eternity in the midst of absolute evil, which the Bible calls hell. So the real question is, when you die, will you be with God? The choice is yours and yours alone. That's how the book ends. And the thing is, I'm not the sort of person who would belittle anyone else's faith, or I'll only share my own. So I'm not going to make fun of anyone else's belief, because when you do that, you're actually attacking that very person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I don't want to do. You want to try and understand where people are coming from. But I do know that after 40 years, over 40 years in fact, that it's not been easy, but it's been an adventure, and I can honestly say that I am happy with myself, and that I'm pleased that the way that I'm turning out. I mean, there's more improvements that we've made, but I'm certainly happy with the way that God is working in my life, etc. And it just and I've made so many. During COVID, I've made so many friends. I mean, I'd love to meet Jennifer in person, have a glass of wine or something. And we've been working on a few projects together, and it's been really fun. And I think Jennifer was saying to me that there is something really evil going on, and I believe that. And I think it certainly correlates with what I believe. And if I might share this, it's quite funny, really. The prophet Daniel, he was told in the last days, I think it was like, children will be disobedient to their parents, people will be lovers of themselves. And then it says, people will travel here and there and knowledge will increase. Well, in those days, people didn't work. People didn't work. People didn't know about aeroplanes. That you could go from one side to the world, and certainly knowledge will increase. That you got the internet, knowledge will increase, but it said nothing about wisdom. And the two are different.
Yeah, very different.
Become very knowledgeable. Now, once we begin to get ourselves together, I think then it's a matter of us just interacting with other people. I like personally having people around for curry evenings, getting to know them. I just love being with people, being in parties and things, and stuff like that. And I think, but first you have to be right with yourself. Otherwise, you're going to just mess up, and you really have to be focusing on the other person. I think a person told me once, "What is the secret of your success?" And the first thought that came to mind was, I had no idea I was.
No.
And then I said, work hard and be kind. Simple.
Yeah, it is. Well, this whole talk of empathy actually just reminds me of the passage in James in the Bible, chapter 2, I believe, where it talks about the tongue. And it's a very, very strong tool that can be either used to crush or to encourage and to bring life or to bring death, and God made us with 2 ears and one mouth, right? And I keep telling my own kids this. You need to use those 2 ears to listen, to, as you said, go into the other person's shoes, to have that empathy before you just go off and speak whatever you think is the right thing or your opinion, which could be very well off. So empathy requires us to take a humble position and to use our ears and to listen and to be empathetic.
I'm glad you said humble is a very odd word.
Yes.
A good definition, working definition that I go by is humility. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less.
Exactly.
When you think of yourself less, you think of others more.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's what we're called to, right? We're called to love God and love your neighbor. And that's exactly how we do it, is actually being empathetic and doing that. At
the same time, we also must stand up for what is right.
Yeah.
And I think coming back just can't help but come back to the issue with children and what's been taught. The parents have been demonstrating, they have been having rallies, and there'll be counter rallies, which have been highly organized. I think they're being paid to do it. And it'd be interesting. I hope it's not for my tax dollars.
No.
And the thing is, they're calling the parents. They're actually saying that the parents are homophobic. The parents are acting out of love for their children because they don't want to see their children harmed. And I think what needs to happen, that there needs to be a dialogue between the schools and the parents and the school boards, and to say, look, these are our concerns. We want you to listen. And who's been telling you this anyway? That our children ought to know this. I think certainly in the high schools, they ought to have sessions on stigma with certain categories, and I think certainly. I mean, if I was to go up to someone, if you were to go up to me, oh, tell us about yourself, Phil, and I'll say I'm psychotic. That's it. End of conversation. You don't go further.
Yeah.
You don't go further than the mental illness. And I think the same is said when someone sort of refers to their gender, for instance. You don't go any further.
Yeah.
And I think that is what, it's that causes the divisions. And I personally feel that there's something that I don't know what the political solution is, but I know for myself it would involve getting to know people and asking questions. And sort of like and that sort of thing. I'm getting rather
no, it's very true. Whether you come from the right or the left or the center, wherever you are in your opinions, what am I trying to say here? From wherever you come from, if you label, with every label, there's preconceived notions, and with your preconceived notions can lead to devastating hurt. And I think that's pretty obvious from the talk we've just had today. So let's be less apt to label people. And as you said, listen and get to know them.
Could I ask you a question of the audience?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Are there any more questions or comments? And particularly if there's something that you really disagree with me over.
All right, let's hear it. Give them a minute.
It's going to be all at once.
And if I missed something that you disagreed with, there's been a lot of comments going on, a lot of chatting. So feel free to stick it back up if there's something that you want to comment or disagree. All right, we have I don't disagree at all. Okay, we've got some spitfire here. Yeah, tried to get to know Antifa.
Who's Antifa?
That's a good point. Oh, yes, they use our money to fulfill their agenda. Parents need to join school boards. I strongly agree. We need to actively get involved to help our next generation. That's it.
I agree with Jennifer on that one.
Yeah, we talk about things to do, right?
It's getting involved. It's getting involved. It's actually being part of the system to change it.
Exactly. So I think that's it.
No
Thank you.
Questions?
No other questions, but you did get quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so along with Get to Know Antifa, we have fascists. Again, a lot of labels, a lot of organizations and groups that are known to cause harm, and kind of goes with the mob rule mentality, which can be very dangerous as well. I think that's it for questions. So,
Okay.
oh, wait. Another, there we go. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that what happens, it all starts in the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where these books for young children come in.
Yeah.
And I think parents ought to be very concerned. I think there ought to be a change of the law as well.
We have another comment here. But I just, I want to thank you, Phil, for sharing this really important topic. I think a lot of us get caught up in the symptoms of the problem, but we don't know what the actual problem is. And I think you've hit the nail. Sorry, you've hit, how does that saying go?
Down on that. Down
Yeah,
on the head.
whatever that thing is.
Yeah,
You got it right.
that's my thing being sort of confused, etc. So
You know, I always have problem with that particular saying. I don't know why. It's just that one. But that saying, you got it right. Empathy is what we lack, and we all need to strive to be more empathetic and humble and listening. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your faith with all of us. And I want to thank all the viewers for coming on tonight to listen to Dr. Philip Oldfield, AKA Philly Raccoon, and asking your questions, sharing your comments, and sharing what you guys believe too, and facts. And it's just been a great evening. So thank you again for coming on. And with that, we're going to tune out.
okay, bye.
Bye.